My sheep hear my voice, and the stranger they will not follow, but will flee from him, for they know not the voice of strangers.
Raising kings and queens require a standard, Zion. To raise kings, to raise queens, you're not necessarily just born a king or born a queen. You're really just born a child, and that child is a prince or a princess. And it's as the child grows that the child begins to understand his or her role as a king or a queen. And in order to fulfill the role properly, Zion, that person, that child, will have to have what's called a standard. A standard. And this is not really too difficult to understand. A standard is a measure. And one of the reasons we've chosen to deal with Mosheh, which is the word for proverb, and look at the Proverbs, is because Mosheh also has in its definition a rule, or just rule. And one of the things I think I was beginning to share with you was the Hebraic mind versus a Western mind concerning words. While our Western minds, like English and, Greek or whatever, is not going to give you necessarily something concrete. Hebrew will, and therefore the concrete definition will help us understand what the actual meaning of the word is. And our goal is to raise or educate our sons and daughters to be the kings and the queens that Yah has raised us to be, and not to make a fool of themselves, and not to become, either just court jesters or some type of not be molded into the image that this westernized world wants to mold us into. We are the kings and queens, but the question is, how do we become kings and queens if we don't have a standard? And I want to say right off the bat that Europe is not our standard. We don't look into the European, so-called monarchy to find our standard. We don't look to Rome. We don't look to the so-called Catholics and the hierarchy structure of their pope and other things. We don't even look into churches and no pastors, and we're not going to look into conventions and the convention presidents and none of that stuff. When we get ready to look at what it means to understand a proverb and what it means to be raised as a king, we must have a standard, Zion, whereby to measure. So we have to have a standard. And I want to share with you another definition, and it goes with what I shared yesterday. And I believe if we look at the book of Proverbs, chapter 1, it says, the proverb of Solomon, the son of David, king of Israel, to know wisdom and instructions, to perceive the words of understanding, to receive instruction of to receive the instruction of wisdom, verse 3, justice and judgment and equity, verse 4, to give subtlety to the simple, to the young man knowledge and discretion. I mentioned this yesterday. A wise man will hear and will increase learning, and a man of understanding shall attain unto wise counsel. And then verse 6, to understand a proverb and the interpretation, the words of the wise and their dark sayings. So this video is just going to focus on the idea to understand a proverb. I already mentioned what the proverb means: to represent, to be like. It has to do with our Hebraic wisdom. It also deals with it deals with sentences that have in them our ethical wisdom. But there's another picture I want to give you in this short video, Zion. It's going to help us understand why how we're going to go forth to make kings and queens. And that is, we have to have a ruler. Now, just write that down for now. A ruler. And when we think of a ruler, most of the time we think of a king. And that's good, because you should. A king is a ruler. But when we go to the base of the Hebraic meaning of the word ruler, it is simply an instrument of measurement. And I was looking everywhere for a ruler, couldn't find one. So I got this. Say, Maury, what is this? This is a measuring rod that the Moray just made up. All right, now I want you to look at it. It's a rule. You see it? No, that's just a stick. Yes, but this stick is going to be used as a measuring rod. Okay? So if this stick is a measuring rod, I created this measuring rod. And this measuring rod will be the standard for all other measuring rods. I'll just use that term. You see it? Okay. So the goal of the parables are to find out how you measure up according to the measuring rod. So we have to first define this. The question is, what is this? Or maybe the greater question would be, who is this? Because our measuring rod, Zion, it can't be your pastor, for sure. It cannot be your deacon. It can't be your teachers. It cannot be, like I said, it can't be their pope, can't be any, no, it's not the picture of the biblical measuring rod. The biblical measuring rod of a king, our picture of the ultimate king is Ha Mashiac. All right? So Ha Mashiac would be the complete measure. Let me see if I can put it in the frame. So this will be the complete measure. In other words, in his life, the life that he lived here, it completely measured up to the top, to the standard, perfection. Now, let's say this is a Mashiach and this is us. So one of the, if he's a king and he's trying to make kings out of us, we start like this. Do you see that? And then we look up at the top. We look up to him and we go, whoo, I got a long ways to go. And so what we do is we start studying the Bible and we start living our lives accordingly, and we continue to measure. And we keep working until we keep measuring up more and more. I hope y'all can see this illustration. Very elementary. But also when we fail, we go, oh man, and we know we're not measuring up, and we go lower and lower and lower. So if this is king status, or I can use the word queen too. If this is sons and daughters of kings, and the greatest king, of course, we had is Ha Mashiac. Second to Ha Mashiac was none other than King David. I mean, point blank. Nobody even close. Then let's say King David, based on the record, was the closest to Ha Mashiac. And let's say he was here, right? So here's Ha Mashiac, and here's David, righteous, except for that thing about Uriah. But when you get to the kingdom, it's going to be, you know what though? But he did a lot of righteous. He wasn't perfect, but he was righteous in a lot of areas, right? He didn't measure up all the way, but he was heck of close. Okay? Then you have his son, who did worse, right? Who was Solomon, who's going to give us these proverbs. And then, of course, when we talk about measure, we're talking about, you know, us. We could be down here. Having so far to go. Now, here's the problem with Israel. And this is a short message. The problem with Israel is what we want to do is remove the standard, the measuring rod. We want it gone. And now, this is us. And now we want everybody else to try to measure up to us. And when they so-called measure up to us, right? Or don't, we like, man, all right, you need to be like this person. You need to be like this person. And you go, wait a minute, but everybody is sin and comes short of the measuring, the glory of Yah, where he made us to be. So the question is, do you get better trying to be like a person who didn't measure up? Let me get this rod out. To the actual measuring rod. And the measuring rod cannot be television. It cannot be radio. It cannot be your favorite nobody or nothing. The measuring rod must stay the same. The measuring rod is what measures us. What Torah or what the Proverbs do is shows us that the ruler, because the word ruler, believe it or not, comes from the idea of a ruler. And that's the word. So the proverb is constantly doing this. This is righteous, and this is foolishness. This is wisdom. This is wickedness. This is what is called the godly. I'm just using that English term, and this is called the satanic. And what he keeps doing is, all through this book, he's showing you how you are to measure to Yah, and how you are, or I should say, let me say that again. Throughout this whole book, he's trying to show us when we are measuring up to the scripture, and how we measure up to the scripture, and when we are doing things that are amiss that will cause us, based on this standard, so we can recognize where we are. So to be a king and a queen, you first got to start off with a king. And the king now will set the standard. And the standard, again, is not social media. The standard is not Hollywood. The standard is not quote unquote church, Christianity, or any kind of religious leader. The standard is the Torah. And the only person who's ever met the standard completely is Ha Mashiac. And so therefore, our goal is to create sons and daughters who do what? Try to come to the full measure of who they are. Somebody said, well, no one will be Ha Mashiac. That's not the point. You're still supposed to work to be like him. And when you are like him, believe me, you are like the greatest king. And you will be like the greatest queens that the world has ever seen. Why? because we have been made in his image. We are his offspring. We are his chosen people. We are a royal priesthood. We are a chosen generation. And the Proverbs help us keep the rule or the ruler straight so that we can constantly check and see how we measure up. I hope this was helpful, Zion. I got to go. We will continue these studies in the book of Proverbs, raising kings and queens.